Hi, Bother Brigade. Here's what's bothering me today. A lot of you probably haven't heard about Detroit Will Breathe, which is one of the most successful organizations to come from the BLM movement that you probably haven't heard of. And so that changes today. And with me today is Nakia Wallace. Nakia, say hi and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name is Nikia Wallace. I am a co-founder and an organizer with Detroit Will Breathe. I am born and raised in the city of Detroit, and yeah.
All right, awesome. And I know some people are thinking, Detroit, oh, that's a very spooky, scary, dangerous city. But based on what you're co founding, it seems one of the greatest dangers in that city are the cops. So I actually want to talk about Detroit Will Breathe first, and then we can talk about your life growing up in Detroit. How did Detroit Will Breathe come about?
So Detroit Will Breathe was founded in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. And essentially what happened was we were leading a series of daily actions, and in Detroit and across the nation, uh, there was the imposition of curfews, and the curfews were racist and unjust curfews. So there was a decision made that the curfew had to be opposed. And as a result of that, a series of arrests took place. So what happened was people were opposing the curfew. And essentially the Detroit Police Department and the mayor's office was using the curfew as an excuse to just engage in violence and terroristic behavior upon people who were coming to protest. And but also using it as an opportunity, like what they sought to do was get ahead of a movement and demoralize it and stomp it down before it could really get leverage and really be built to the capacity that it could be. And so we had to oppose the curfew. The curfew was racist, but also, in addition to being racist, it was the initial kind of milestone, right? In terms of like, are we gonna be a movement that is able to kind of self-organize and protest on our own terms and not the terms of the people we're protesting against? And so after the the first mass arrest, as we would call it, because they had been arresting and terrorizing people before, but this is what we would call a mass arrest, in which something like 120, 150 people were arrested
Wow.
and mass opposed to curfew. It became clear that we were in direct confrontation with the state. And in order to be in direct confrontation with the state, you need organizational power.
You had said earlier about the curfew being racist. Like in what way was it racist, in terms of just like strictly targeting black communities in Detroit, or like in what way?
So the curfew, again, other places around the country saw these curfews, right? Like they were
Yeah,
their
like
curfews.
they were in Minneapolis, I think Washington
Yeah,
D.C., because there were also I think like there were threats that like Proud Boys or something would sort of counter protest, and so to prevent any of that, they implemented curfews. And you
but
also
what
said something about like the power to like mass arrest people, because I know that protests can suddenly be declared unlawful in many places as well, which is messed up. But
yeah,
yeah, I just want more perspective on like
yeah.
that
So
element of it.
Detroit is a city who Detroit is the blackest city in the nation. It's a
Okay.
city, the most segregated city in America.
Ugh.
And it is a city, like, to give you kind of an understanding of Detroit, it is very, very possible to go your entire life in the city of Detroit and only encounter a handful of white people. And it is that
Hmm.
way because Detroit was a city that um, long was a place of Black freedom struggle and a place of Black liberation. So what many people here say is Detroit has a tradition of Black radical struggle. So there was a series of riots in the 1960s, and Detroit had a major riot in 1967. And what happened in the aftermath was white flight, meaning the majority of the
They
cities.
fled to the suburbs, yeah.
That,
But they still work in the city. Like a lot of the cops live in surrounding communities, but they work in the city, and it's like, okay, so they're really just bringing all that wealth out of the city into the suburbs, and it's not being reinvested into local community.
yes. So that is kind of the historical like makeup that we're working with. But Detroit, from the day that from that the day that the 1967 rebellion happened, um, from that day until this one, two things have happened. One, we've been punished for it ever since, and two, uh, there has been an attempt to take all of the resources from the city of Detroit and the political power from the Black residents of the city. So it's the largest city in the state of Michigan. It's the blackest city, and it sits right on the Detroit River, which essentially pumps water throughout the entire state. And also, it's the Motor City. So it meant that there's this kind of one really rich working class history, but also like a history of being a beacon of labor, like of creating the cars for the rest of the country. I'm just trying to think of like things that are important for the setup.
To provide context for a lot of people who don't know much about Detroit aside from poverty and Eminem. Like, unfortunately, that's what and the Red Wings. Unfortunately, that's really what a lot of people in most places know about Detroit.
Canadians like hockey. So actual Detroiters, right? Because Detroit is a black city. It's, there's a whole lot of gentrification, and it's definitely contested right now. But, as far as I'm concerned, Detroit is a black city, and we don't give a damn about the hockey, about the Red Wings. Like, we don't.
Hey, I won't fault you for it.
And I'm not, y'all love hockey, and that's great, but we don't give a damn.
All right.
That's a really, really white sport. So Detroit is a city like that. I grew up in a city that was 93% black. And now it's about 75% black because of the efforts to really push black residents out and really make it kind of like impossible through a bunch of different means and measures, right? Like, we went through a series of different emergency managements. We're facing, and again, Detroit and across the nation, like there's long been an attack on public education. So there's a series of like changes that are happening, but what those changes mean is the displacement of black residents in the city of Detroit. But basically in 1973, Detroit elected its first black mayor, which is a guy named Coleman Young. And I'm not, going to talk about the legacy of Coleman Young because that's not what I'm here to do. But that was kind of a major turning point for the city of Detroit because it meant black political power. Now, black political power in the sense of elected officials, right? Like, we, as far as I can remember until recent, like my entire life, we've always had an all black city council. We've always had, the clerk, all of that. It's been black. But also, when I say political power, I mean like organizing power from a grassroots independent level.
Okay.
So I'm talking about it in a twofold way, and I want to kind of be really clear about that when I say political power.
Like not just as in look at the position of power we hold, but in terms of look at the actual community's safety and wealth and security that we've built up as well, kind of thing.
No, I mean the ability of working class people to actually self-organize and have organizations or fight around campaigns.
Okay, gotcha now.
Like in the street. is what I
Yeah,
mean.
yeah. Okay. Yes. Now I gotcha.
So, so I'm
It, it,
trying to
it clicked.
so both, like both of those things are true, and both of those things came out of the legacy of the struggle, this rich radical tradition of struggle in the city of Detroit, right? Like you don't get black politicians in the city of Detroit without this like movement of black radical organizers and activists. Uh, I hope that I'm being clear, but if I'm not, you can
I
always like
mean, to
stop.
me, you're being clear. I'm hoping it's pretty clear to everyone else. But yeah, like the way you explained, the way you explained I think I have it clear in my head about what you mean by like political power and grassroots like street activism and that kind of political, almost like, if you want to call it like an almost revolutionary kind of power in terms of
Well, I
like
wouldn't say.
I'm saying, like, it's depending who you ask, right? But
I, I
like that.
wouldn't say that. But I guess anyway, that's the. I'm trying to set up a context, particularly because I know you have viewers who might not understand that context.
Which I
Um,
appreciate you doing that.
so, but Detroit is in the north. So, what does that mean to be a city that has long been known as one of the most segregated cities in the nation, but not be a city that was in the American South, right? Um, Michigan, the state of Michigan is a militia hotbed.
I've
So
heard.
it is one of the most racist. Um, we have sundown towns, and a sundown town is like, if you are a black or brown person, you should not be in this city when the sun goes down.
Yeah, because you're probably not leaving by morning.
Yeah. So this is the the makeup of the state, that this city that has too much black political power, and the black people who live there have a little bit too much say over what happens. Now, again, we can't exist in a vacuum, right? Like we need federal funding, we need state funding, and all these things. So when I said earlier that we've been punished every day since, right, we have been, because we can't. People would like to believe that like black people can just go off on our own and do our own thing and live and thrive and be well, but it's just not true, because we can't exist in a vacuum, right? And we need resources. Like we have to be giving resources back and forth. And so Detroit has just been it's been punished ever since. In 2013, Detroit elected its first white mayor from 1973. And so how does that happen? We find ourselves in this place. So there's a series of efforts from the state and federal government by way of emergency management, uh, really prompted by like a bankruptcy.
Oh
But
yeah, I think I
even
remember hearing news about that back in the day. There was like a bankruptcy and like this state got involved. Like, oh, see, Detroit can't manage itself, so we got to do a whole bunch of things. And I was like, wait, what? This is a thing? Okay.
Mm-hmm. So the imposition of emergency managers. And so an emergency manager is a person who is typically appointed by the governor of a state um, to manage the finances. Um, Here's the thing about the state of Michigan, though. Flint, which is a place that has become popular because of the water crisis, is about 45 minutes outside of Detroit. And Flint is a black city, right? It's not as big as Detroit, but it's a black city. And there are so the state of Michigan looks like a mitten.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
And then you got the Upper Peninsula, yeah.
This Upper Peninsula. So I'm not going to talk about the Upper Peninsula because that's an extremely white place that I've never been to. Um,
All right.
You've got Detroit, and then you've got like Flint, and people are gonna make fun of me because I'm gonna totally botch this. But then there's some other like pockets of Black people. There's Benton Harbor. There's Grand Rapids, which is where Breonna Taylor's family was from. So there's some other pockets outside of Detroit, but they're far. They're little, they're kind of far from Detroit, and Detroit is the largest. But if you live in the state of Michigan, you had a 50% chance of being under emergency management, of being under an emergency manager than if you were white. So Black residents had a 50% more chance of being in a city under an emergency manager than white residents.
Wow.
Black cities were failing more financially, right? But because of systemic racism and the need for the capitalists to really hone in and break up some of the political power that existed. So gotcha. I hope that was clear. I guess everything I was trying to say was really to paint that picture.
To set the stage for Black people in the state of Michigan and the, like, I don't know if you want to call it a siege mentality of just like the state is constantly going after Black people in the state.
And Michigan is a particular place in a whole set of ways, but Michigan is not the only place, right? Like you see in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, they just use that as an excuse to completely fuck over the Black residents of New Orleans. And one of the clearest examples is they just got rid of their public school system. Just completely got rid of it.
They just got rid of it.
And it was replaced by like a series of charter school. I mean, it was so. Detroit and Michigan is a particular place, and that's what I'm here to talk about. But like what we're seeing is a problem across the country, but also it's a global problem. It's an international problem, and it's true. And I'm stressing this because, and the reason why like this interview is really important is because we know there's going to need to be, there's no liberation that's not global. There's no liberation that's going to last that's not global, and global repression requires like global solutions and global interactions. And the people who oppress us are coordinated internationally,
and they have the power, they have the logistics, they have the resources,
and we have to have an international response. So yeah, all right, you can
no, that's I gotta say that's a hell of an intro. So that's the environment within which Detroit Will Breathe comes about. And in the wake of the George Floyd murder by Derek Chauvin. And so, like, how did that get started? Like, was it you and a couple other people who said, we have a moment here, or like an opportunity here, and like, so how do we make it go as far as we can take it, right? Like how does that conversation go?
So if you Google any like news outlet, they will tell you one of two things. One, that Detroit Will Breathe is an organization started and run by white people who don't live in the city of Detroit. And two, that the Black people in Detroit Will Breathe are inexperienced and are being led astray by these white people.
Okay.
The truth of the matter is that Detroit Will Breathe is an integrated organization founded by people who have been doing this for a really long time. And that doesn't matter, right? Because I don't want to, it matters until it doesn't, right? Like, you don't have to have been an organizer for 10 years in order to be able to stand up against police brutality and systemic racism, right? But the truth is the truth. And so Detroit Will Breathe was founded in my living room. And what happened is Tristan Taylor, who's also the co-founder of Detroit Will Breathe and who happens to also be my uncle, he's 36 and he's been politically active in the city of Detroit since he was 17 years old.
Wow.
I will be 25 in 2 days, and
Happy early birthday.
I got my start in organizing when I was 12 years old around the defense of public education in the city of Detroit. And then we have, there's Jay Bass, who is newer to politics. We have Claire and Brian and a bunch of people who have been active in organizations such as Detroit Eviction Defense, Detroit Renter City, Charlevoix Village Association. So we've done a couple things, is what I'm trying to say.
It's not like this is your first rodeo, right?
Yeah, we've done a couple things and we learned a couple lessons. And really, we just knew that, again, it really boiled down to the fact. So when that first round of arrests happened, they took Tristan Taylor, and he was questioned by the FBI. He was originally charged with inciting a riot, which is insane.
Jesus.
Well, but this is a playbook. I mean,
I feel it, but it's just like so unreal still to hear. Like it's, it bothers me deeply. Hence the name of the channel. But yeah. So they arrested him, and then what happened?
I knew two things. One, we were gonna fucking oppose that curfew the next day. We were going back. Because now it's on.
No, I respect it.
And two, we just need a better organization. I mean, we were like on our personal Facebook pages, like the protest is tomorrow. Like that first week, I mean, I had like 10,000 Facebook requests, and I'm not even like that social of a person. So one, there was like actual logistical things that just weren't pragmatic. Like we could not continue. We need to be able to organize like the bail. We had a wonderful team of medics that was starting to get self-organized. Like we just needed actual like logistical and organizational things to work out, right? And we kind of needed to create an organization to do it. But also, really, like the question of us becoming an organization was a political question because if you read Stride Towards Freedom by Dr. King, when he's talking about the Montgomery bus boycott, one of the things when they're having their meeting is they're like, do we call the boycott and not put our names on it? And I think it's Joanne Robinson who's like, if we're too scared to put our names on it, we might as well go home. Like we're, like they're going to find out anyway. But we need to be able to kind of be bold and proud. And so anyway, we had to create an organization for like all of those reasons. And there's some whatever they always, what I remember and what other people remember is different, so I won't say how we got our name because we all fight over it. But
okay.
Somebody said Detroit can't breathe, and what is true and what everybody remembers is I was like, I will lay down in the street right now and die before we ever say where Detroit can't breathe. And so what's contested is like who came up with the actual name. And somebody was like, well, what about Detroit will breathe? And then we were like, great, we'll do that.
All right, there you go.
But when we started, we were like, we are a coalition. We didn't understand the moment we were in, not fully. And we didn't understand how long things would, we had no clue. So we were like, we are a coalition, a collective that like individuals and other organizations can join. We're just a kind of banner thing. And then somewhere along the lines like that kept getting revised. And we realized like Detroit Will Breathe needs to be able to move independently and have its own political perspective, right? And though we were at the forefront of the movement and certainly leading it, we also were not the movement. Like we are an organization that's at the forefront, but we were not the movement.
Yeah,
we were not
you were part of the movement because the movement was in different cities. It was with different communities, different coalitions, different organizations. No,
Yeah.
I get it. Which means I guess we should talk a bit about what Detroit Will Breathe has done, because the thing that I remember hearing, like that first put Detroit Will Breathe on the radar for me, was y'all sued the cops and
Yeah.
won.
Yeah, that was,
Like
and
what?
our video came out. Just thank you. Because what we were facing internally as an organization was a real kind of inability to reckon with the ways that we are unique and dynamic. And I don't want to, and I'm not trying to be it's just kind of it is important to try to reckon with that when you're trying to build and sustain a movement, and to understand where you are locally in relationship to the national movement. And so you have no idea, the your video came out at a time where we were internally like reckoning with
Okay then.
our own successes and failures as an organization. And so thank you, because yeah. um so we did a bunch of things. So we opposed the curfew. It got lifted because again we were like, okay, charge us with felonies, beat our asses, tear gas us, we coming back. And they had to lift it. And so that was kind of what I would say was like our first victory, was forcing the city of Detroit, the mayor and the police chief, to lift the curfew. And that was the start. I think that first week, people started to approach us and talk about a lawsuit. And to be quite honest,
Okay.
I was absolutely, we're not going to do that. Not because I didn't think it was important, but you cannot understand the amount, just how busy we were. Like,
I can believe it.
we just were just so, like, 3 hours of sleep, like
Oof.
phone constantly ringing, and meeting and reading and discussing and debating and really trying to figure out the moment.
Yeah, like just all gas, no brakes, right?
Yeah, and getting our asses beat every day, and tear gas, and getting arrested, and I mean, and it's all, and it is what it is. We pay the price, but yeah, I was like, lawsuit, we're not, no. And a member of our leadership team kind of was very persistent and kept bringing it up. And so there's some pivotal moments that happen, that lay kind of the groundwork. So from the beginning, we have been being approached. June 28th,
Okay.
they run us
of 2020, right?
right. Sorry, June 28th. So protests start May 29th. We marched for over 200 days consecutively to kind of give an, but June, so there's a bunch of things that happen, and I'm missing some of it, and I feel bad. And I tried to get Brian, who's also on leadership, to join this call, but he was in another call with another organization. But maybe he's a little bit better with the dates than I am. But the end of June, we have a march in Southwest Detroit, and Southwest Detroit is called Mexican Town. So even though Detroit is an extremely Black city historically, Southwest Detroit is also a huge Latino population. Okay. And what it is that happens on that day is a real, there's over 80 organizations that plan that day, and the title of that march was Te Lucha es Mi Lucha. Your fight is my fight. And the city of Detroit could not take that unity from grassroots organizers. And so they were on edge the entire day. And they tried to run us over a couple of times, but then there's this really, and maybe I don't know what there's a clip, I don't know if you'll be able to show it or maybe you can reference it or whatever, where they just hit the gas and go as full speed as they can, and J Bass is on the hood of the fucking car because they run through our march and they take off with him on the hood of the car, and you see another protester by the wheel of the car, and he like rolls just in enough time.
Jeez.
I mean, they just try to kill us, right? Which is if you were a Black person and you're poor and you lived in this city, like that is just the truth.
Yeah, like that's just a part of your daily lived experience.
Right. So that happens. And about 2 weeks later, they kill Hakeem Littleton, who was a 19-year-old young man. And they're engaging in a raid on the house. They're not there to get him. He's not a suspect. He gets nervous. You can see in the video, he's terrified. He reaches for his gun, he shoots, they detain him, kick the gun away, and still decide to shoot him in the back of his head. There's subsequently like people come out that same day, and this is before we have the video footage, right? People come out, we're like, we want to know what happened. Are you fucking kidding us? We're marching every single day in these streets. This is the largest social movement in the history of the United States, and you are murdering Black boys. So that day, what happened was a large presence. And so that, when I'm talking about the fights and efforts to displace Detroiters, but also the ways in which we're trying to fight against that, where that happens is on the corner of McNichols, which we call 6 Mile in the city of Detroit. So 6 Mile or McNichols and San Juan, but it's a border. It's a border between two neighborhoods, the Fitzgerald neighborhood, which historically is a very, very poor neighborhood, and the Bagley neighborhood, which is a neighborhood, they're not rich, but they have, I think now, about 70% home ownership. 10 years ago, they were at like 83% home ownership. Okay. So definitely this middle-class neighborhood. But that entire, Mayor Duggan has selected particular areas for a revitalization, right? And
which is just gentrification. Yeah.
Yes, and the displacement of Black people. So this is a border that's hyper policed. This is a border in a neighborhood hyper policed because of that. And so Hakeem Littleton is murdered that day, and there is a show of community members who are like, we came with a list of demands on the day. We demanded, one, we want the names and badge numbers of all the officers that were there and involved. We want all of the video and audio, and we want it unedited, and we want the fucking chief to come out and talk to us. So what happens is, this is a residential neighborhood, by the way. So you've got, like, this is like, people live here. Like, Black children live here, play here, and they bring out tanks. So there's like images of that too. There's tanks rolling down this San Juan, this residential neighborhood. They have
Unreal.
I mean, I don't know if they have like guns that are like tall, like they're like, like you need 2 hands to carry it. They've got the riot police out, and they make the decision to shoot tear gas into a residential neighborhood where Black children are playing and living, into the windows of Black residents, right? And it's just not a thing that ever. They just don't shoot fucking tear gas in white neighborhoods where white people have their windows up in the summertime. Like, they just don't. You just, that level of violence and brutality is just not dispensed. White people are not subjected to it. That's a day that I end up in a chokehold by the Detroit Police Department. And I mean, so many things happened on that day. Then there's something else that I'm gonna miss, and yeah, there's a bunch of things that, I mean, we kind of went through the summer like that and battle like that. And then August 22nd happened. So in August, there is something that is renewed by the Trump administration called Operation Legend and Relentless Pursuit. So Relentless Pursuit was a program from the federal government in which they were creating task force and giving money and militarized supplies to local police departments under the guise of being able to relentlessly pursue criminals. So what we know about some of the aftermath of that program was that, like, there's articles like in Chicago, these federal fucking officers were doing things like stop and frisk, but also they were following, like, there's one article about a guy that they were following around because he had a prior criminal record, and so their like method was just following people around who had been known to be violent, and he like parks incorrectly, and then they get him on a parole violation and charge him with a felony.
Wow.
So there's, I don't know if, do you know what a felony is, or like a
like I have a rudimentary understanding of
okay,
like
so there's different
basic
types,
levels of
like,
crime. Like you have misdemeanors, which
right.
are light. Felonies are considered more
So a civil
serious.
infraction is like you get a ticket and you have to pay a fine. Like that's like when you park wrong, or sometimes they'll give you a ticket if your music's too loud, if you know, things like that. A ticket, you just get a written ticket. And then there's a misdemeanor, and so misdemeanors range, and some places do like class A, B, or C misdemeanors, and that determines how worse
Okay,
it
I've
is.
heard of that. Yeah, yeah.
A misdemeanor can be anything from a fine to jail time, but you'll still be able to get a job with a misdemeanor. A felony is like
That's a
you are
capital C crime.
right, like a felony is like, it is virtually impossible to get a job in this country if you are a felon, or just anything. I mean, you know, whatever. It's so this is what Relentless Pursuit led to. It also led to a case of like police, I don't know, it was one of the southern states, I'm not sure if it was Memphis, which is in Tennessee, which is not a state, but it was one of the southern states where it was like a famous kind of thing that happened where they missed these Relentless Pursuit officers misidentified a teenage kid and ended up shooting him in the back because they think he's. So these these task force result in nothing. So what happens is they revamp it and they rename it Operation Legend / Relentless Pursuit because there is a child, I believe, in Chicago who is killed by gun violence, and his name is Legend. And so they're using this kind of propaganda thing, and they're using this child's murder as an excuse for why local police departments need to be militarized.
That's just, it's all so incredibly strange. But yeah, so like Operation Legend happens, and then
right.
Yeah.
So, and basically, I'm just trying to lead up to, we had to oppose that, obviously. So there's a statewide day of action, and Woodward Avenue is a major street in the city of Detroit, and it runs into downtown Detroit. And it also was the place where they had what they call fusion sites, which is a place where like every form of law enforcement colludes, right? So that's where your local police, your state police, your federal government, Homeland Security, ICE, right, which is Immigrations and Customs, Border Patrol, they're all sharing information and resources at these fusion centers. And so there's one on Woodward.
That's so dystopian as all hell. Sheesh.
So we hold a protest in which we say we're not going to leave until the federal agents leave. Because you have to understand that this is the city of Detroit in the middle of a pandemic, where there's in June, there's still 5,000 people who have self-identified as not having running water. So we're in this pandemic. People don't have running water in the city of Detroit. People are homeless. Any condition that was already bad has been exacerbated. And what we know is that COVID-19 had a much larger effect on Black poor communities than anywhere else. Yep. And so Detroit is desecrated. I mean, the effects and devastation of COVID-19, I can't even explain them. And in the middle of that, the federal government wants to send money for policing. And there's no
yeah, because like, why spend it on communities? Got to give cops more weaponry, right?
We're in so deep. Like, it's been bad, and it's been bad for so long, and it's just gotten so much worse. And they want to give more money and resources to the fucking police. And they have no plan for vaccination. I mean, I don't think there was a vaccine at the time, but they have no plan for anything. They're like,
it was just, hey, just keep the economy going, and if you die, well, you die. Like, whatever.
They don't give a fuck. There's nothing. There's no plan for the people who live in the city of Detroit. And so that was completely unacceptable to us. That was completely unacceptable.
Understandable.
So we take the street and we say we're not going to leave until the federal agents leave. We want a stimulus package. We want a federal stimulus package instead with those funds that are going to come to the city of Detroit. And what happens is it's a massacre. Somebody recently was talking to me about August 22nd, which is the date we're talking about, and they called it a massacre. And the image, the videos and images are there. They beat us up. They, do their thing with the tear gas. We get arrested. They detain us outside for from 3 a.m. until 10 a.m. We're just outside in the cold. They don't even let us jail. I had to pee on a bus, on a gender integrated bus. They're not giving us masks. We're in the middle of COVID. They're not socially distancing. Like, they just don't give a fuck.
Oh God, yeah, that's just extremely dystopian. Ugh.
So after August 22nd, the person on our leadership team who was kept bringing up the question of the lawsuit, or no, I don't want to. We had agreed to it. Actually, I think in July we had agreed to it, but we were dragging our feet on it. And after August 22nd, it was it's time to file now. And so we filed this federal injunction, and one of the reasons why this is really important is because we get this federal injunction, which means a federal judge says that for 14 days, there's a temporary restraining order, meaning the Detroit Police Department is not allowed to shoot tear gas into crowds. They're not allowed to do mass arrests for no reason. Whatever. There's a long list of things, and I can get you the document. You can look it over yourself.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, that they're enjoined, which means they can't do pursuant to this federal judge. And it's major because there has not been a time in the living history of the city of Detroit in which the power of the police has been limited. And you have to understand, it's not just Detroit will breathe. It effectively changes the way that they can operate in the city. Meaning, if there is a fucking group of 30 Black kids on the corner, they would be in violation of this federal restraining order if they shoot tear gas into those 30 Black kids and arrest them all en masse. So they're restricted in a major political way. And after the 14 days are up, what happens is the temporary restraining order becomes something called injunctive relief, meaning they have to continue to follow those rules the duration of the lawsuit. So they still are under the rules of that temporary restraining order today.
Yeah, because the lawsuit is still ongoing.
The lawsuit is still ongoing. So the lawsuit has 14 plaintiffs. Detroit Will Breathe itself is a plaintiff, and then 13 actual human beings who came together and sued on different reasons, right? Like for me, the issue of the chokehold is one of them. For Jay Bass, he got ran over by the car. There's a person who is experiencing long-term lasting health disparities as a result of tear gas. There is a person who has long-term health disparities because of the use of LRAD or sound cannons, which are like, if you watch documentaries about Waco or cults and they bring in those or like prison riots and they have like those sound cannons where they're like playing noise to kind of disorient people.
Well,
They
yeah,
use that
and it's also directed. So if you're standing beside it or behind it, it's fine. Like LRAD just stands for long range acoustic device, I think. So it's an unfortunately common tactic with police. They've used them a lot with, I know, Line 3 pipeline protesters in Minnesota. That's where I've heard of them being deployed most recently. So yeah, not pleasant. I've never experienced one, but just what I've heard is like, oh, it is extremely disquieting to be in front of that.
Yeah. There's a person who they broke their hip with batons, like with, like they just like so, they like are putting their entire weight down on this young woman to the point where they shatter her hip, which is almost impossible to do.
Yeah, like your hips and thigh bones are very strong. To mess with those,
yep.
like something's got to go wrong.
Yep. So there's whatever. There's 14. And for people who are interested, they'll be able to. You can Google it right now, but I'll send it to you and you can read through it.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
It's all public when a lawsuit is filed like that. It's all public. So, yeah, so that's our lawsuit, and that's why it was kind of a major thing, because the power of the police is restricted in a major way, and it just is not a thing that's common, but really showed the political strength and dynamism of the movement. Because the truth is, we can look at things like Brown versus Board of Education, which is a landmark case and is the reason why there's public education that has to be equal in the United States. But before Brown, people have been trying to sue because of like racist and unequal education. It needed a movement of people in the streets to coincide it. And so
gotcha.
That's why Brown passed, and that's why we were where we were with this federal lawsuit, right? People have been trying to limit the power of the police from the beginning.
Oh yeah, hey, like that's been a long time struggle. Yeah. And it's good to see at least some success, right? Like you said, people have been trying this for a while, been unsuccessful. It finally happened, at least in Detroit. So, I'll take a win where I could get one. But it's still very impressive to see, but it just shows again how much fight there is still left to do, and just how much constant organizing and showing up is required. Like it's definitely an effort.
Yeah. So,
yeah. Well,
what's
so
that?
No, but that's good. That basically answers the question, which is like, what was involved with charging the police and getting the restraining order. I'd say that's an incredibly detailed answer. Thank you so much for providing that. For me, the natural follow-up to that is, and I kind of think I know the answer, but I just would love to hear it anyway. Were you at all surprised when the city then tried to counter sue?
Listen. So Mike Duggan is the mayor of the city of Detroit, and there are some elders who don't say the Duggan administration; they refer to it as the Thuggin administration. Because,
Nice.
the just pervasive nature. So on the one hand, yeah, actually, I was like, oh, these motherfuckers got audacity. Because what you is at the time that they filed the countersuit, there's at least 600 charges. Not and it doesn't have to be 600 people because they will sometimes charge people twice, but there's 600 charges that they are like trying to criminally charge people who engaged in protests. And what happens is they decide to double down and to file a countersuit. But at the time that they file this countersuit, judges in the 36th District Court of Detroit dismiss like 30 cases on the grounds of they have no evidence, they had no reason to charge these people, and they're not producing discovery, which is discovery is like when you are charged with something, they have to like show why they charged you. So like things like body cam footage or even a fucking like they're supposed to write like a note, not a note. I can't.
Take a statement, you mean? Or
well, just like they're supposed to write like at the end of a shift or beginning of like they're supposed to. They had none of that. They had none.
Okay, right. That. So like they didn't have reports, they didn't have body cam footage, right. They didn't have any kind of evidence. Like yeah, look, like we dusted this brick for fingerprints, has his fingerprints on it, so we know he threw it. Blah
right.
blah blah.
So charges are being dismissed en masse. And so the city of Detroit, in order to try to save face, they decide to drop 200 cases. So they get 100 and I think like 134 dismissed by the judges.
Wow.
They decide to like drop 200 of them, or like the inverse, or maybe 200 would drop. They decide to 100, whatever, because they know they don't have a leg to stand on. But also what they really want to do is just engage in political persecution of leadership. So they really want to target Detroit Will Breathe. And they essentially drop everybody's charges that they didn't feel like they could prove, and they focus in on me and Tristan Taylor and other members, known organizers, and members of leadership of Detroit Will Breathe. And
because y'all were getting a little too uppity.
Well, born, bred, raised, and made in the city of Detroit, right? There's a thing old Black women say. My grandmother used to say, "You got it honest," which means it means like you have the traits of like your parents or family members.
Okay.
Right? They'll say that like, if your dad is stubborn and you're stubborn, they'll say like, "Well, you got it honest." So
okay.
That's the legacy that's left for us, right? Is the legacy of like engaging in the struggle. But whatever. So this is political persecution. But I'll say again, on the one hand, like the Duggan administration and Chief Craig are your enemies, right? And that's we're very clear about that. But to stand in a courtroom, because when they read the thing, they say the case, the city of Detroit versus Nakia Wallace. That experience is an unreal one, because I'm the city of Detroit.
Yeah, it's like, hi, I live here. What?
Like that's an experience that is insanity, because you were like, none of these fucking this prosecutor, this judge, none of these people are more of a representation of the city of Detroit than I am. So I don't know, that's an experience, but the audacity that they display when countersuing us, really what it is we're engaged in a political struggle. And so the countersuit was thrown out with prejudice, meaning the judge was like, so the countersuit they were saying on the basis of civil conspiracy.
Yes, yeah.
And so
It was like you were trying to engage in a civil conspiracy to like harm the city of Detroit and the authority of the municipal government, which is like, have you tried not being terrible? Like what?
well, but saying because essentially they're saying we engaged in a plot and a plan to like incite violence and destruction. And so what they're alleging, like they're trying to say we like get together and have meetings and we're like, how do we make it so that people are all like go and stab the police? Basically, like
Let's be evil today. It's like that.
It's extreme kind of charge. And the thing is there was no Detroit didn't burn. Detroit didn't burn. There was not a singular fire in the city of Detroit because of protest. So it's kind of like ridiculous in comparison to like what is actually happening like on the ground. But we were extremely militant in a way that they could not, they had to try to squash. And so they're going to use every tool at their disposal. And they just got to a point where they realized, like, fuck, beating the shit out of them does not work. It actually doesn't work with them. Like, they are prepared to take our ass whoopings. And so it meant that they had to use every tool, and still, like, they have to try to use every tool of their disposal to try to discredit and disarm the movement, like, and disarm organization. So on the one hand, it was just like insane because it was like civil conspiracy. Yeah, okay.
Then, hi, yes. Remember why we're out here in the streets protesting in the first place? Like, hello.
Yeah. And and then on the other hand, it was like this is a political like battle that we're engaged in, and they play their hand. The judge dismissed it, but what happens is they continue to use that rhetoric. Like even though the judge dismissed it with prejudice, meaning that they can never, ever, ever mention or say that we were engaged in civil conspiracy because there's no proof of it. They still do it. So, like, for example, in board of police commissioner meetings or because in order to get the money to engage in this countersuit, it had to go through city council. So they, in their meetings and presentations, they're like, these are violent people who have a plot and we're going to prove it, but we need the money to prove it. And then all of it's going to come out in the lawsuit and all of this ridiculous
stuff. Oh boy. Fun.
So,
oh God.
And it is like, I am, I always say I love Detroit more than I love myself. And I mean that. So the city that you like love and are prepared to, in a lot of ways, give your life to then use every resource at its disposal to try to destroy you. That's an experience.
And I'm assuming not a pleasant one. Yeah.
No. Certainly not pleasant, but it is an experience.
Well, again, thank you for sharing that. I do have still like a ton more questions about BLM and of course your love for Detroit. I don't want to just be like, oh, look how terrible Detroit is. Like, I want to share some good stuff. But earlier you mentioned a little bit, I think, about some other stuff that Detroit Will Breathe was doing, or like working with other groups. I think it was on your website at one point. You were also bringing attention to the housing crisis in Detroit with like evictions and stuff. So like Detroit Will Breathe is not just about justice for Black lives and ending police brutality. It's about much more than that. What else does the organization push for?
Yeah, so we're an organization that fights in defense of Black and brown life wherever it's under attack. And what that means is like there's an eviction crisis in this city. There is a housing crisis in general in this city, and Black and brown people are under attack. You know, there I can't even begin to explain. At the point that we started this movement, again, there was about 30,000 people in the city of Detroit who had not paid their water bill, and just who couldn't, who were just didn't have running water. And there was a fight because of COVID-19. I mean, there had long been a fight before COVID. There was a fight. There were people saying like, this is inhumane and people need running water. And the fact that they can't afford their water bill is not a fucking excuse or a reason for people to be living and not have running water.
It's kind of necessary to survive.
Right. Through the efforts of activists who have been fighting that, but also really, again, this is why mass movements matter more than anything, because again, that's a fight that people have been engaged in. But now there's a mass movement of people in the streets every single day. And so what happens is the city of Detroit announces that they're going to cut everyone's water back on, and that they will no longer shut off people's water because of their water bill. And that's a victory that's won by the movement.
And so that's a hell of a victory.
Those are the types of things that we seek to engage in. And so really fighting around so there's a case of like these two young men in Southwest Detroit. They're outside, they're at like a birthday party, and the gang unit, there's video footage of it, and anybody who like goes through our social media pages can find it. They just rush into this birthday party, hem up these young men, beat them up, and then charge them with assault. And so we launched a campaign around them. Ultimately, their charges were dropped. Launched a campaign around a woman named Miss Geraldine. So in the city of Detroit, again, right, like it's a place where Black residents are being displaced. And one of the ways that the city did it was they overtaxed homeowners. So the city of Detroit, again, this historical place of being the Black city of the nation, but also we led the nation in Black home ownership. Like the city of Detroit historically was known for having the largest amount of Black people who own their homes. So what happened was, again, in an effort to displace Black residents and also take some of that power, there's too much Black political power in the city of Detroit. They overtax homeowners by over $600 million, and they provide no relief. But what happens is, in this overtaxation, they take people's homes. So Miss Geraldine is a woman who lives on the east side of Detroit, who her home has been in her family for, I think, 4 generations. So she inherited that home from her mother, who inherited it from her mother, who inherited it from her mother, was overtaxed by $2,000 or $1,500. It was not a lot of money, except for the fact that it's a lot of money when you can't pay it. And the city of Detroit decided to foreclose on her home. So what happens is they sell her home to this community land trust, whatever, and this community land trust doesn't do right by her. They make no repairs. And there's, again, all of this is like, there's video footage of it. You can see like the walkthrough, like her walls are caving in, her front steps are shaky. There's holes in the dead of winter, like holes leading to the outside. So like water's coming in. She has no electricity in the front part of her house. House is in a really dilapidated state, to the point where I was like, can you repair that? And then people were like, yeah, you can. But the fight was, Miss Geraldine should give her fucking house back so she can fix her house, so she can repair her house. Because You took her house and you didn't repair it, and now you are forcing her to live in squalor in an attempt to push her out. So the fight for Miss Jodine is important because it's not simply a question of an individual basis, but what we gained in being able to force Storehouse of Hope to give her house back or engage in an agreement is the right of homeowners in the city of Detroit to stand their ground and to refuse to be pushed out and displaced, and to build similar campaigns where they
We could use
are.
some of that up here. Let me tell you, our housing crisis is.
Well, listen. So, the fight.
I am listening.
we should talk, um, but Miss Jodine, that's an example of like ways that we've intervened, but also really intervening in the question of evictions in the city of Detroit. So just as there's a home ownership crisis, right? There is like you can spit out the window and hit somebody that's being evicted. And that shit's gotta stop. Like it's just gotta stop. It's racist. It has to be opposed because these evictions are again a part of the efforts to displace Black residents. And so
are by the way, are rent evictions very popular there? Where it's, oh, we gotta evict you so that we can renovate it, and then they just hike up the rent and say, well, geez, I can't afford it. Like theoretically, we have tenant protections, but not everyone knows about them and such like that. So is it as common down there as it is up here?
There's a lot of reasons. Okay, so let me paint this picture for you. In the city of Detroit, 96% of rental properties are not compliant with the code that the city of Detroit has set forth. They just don't. They're not compliant, so they're not able to like actually be registered. But in any case, they have police carrying out these fucking evictions, legal and illegal evictions, on the basis of whatever, right? Whether it is people not being able to afford their rent anymore, or I mean that's the most common is like non-payment of rent issues. And what it is that we seek to do is build a campaign and a strategy large enough to force the city of Detroit to provide relief to renters, and to really prioritize housing. The interesting thing, or not interesting, but the thing about COVID was that there was federal funding that came down to pay people's rent, to pay landlords for the money that they had lost. And what we have been fighting for pre-COVID was a moratorium on evictions, meaning a moratorium is like a cease.
Yeah.
Like it can't happen. So an eviction moratorium was being fought for pre-COVID, and during COVID, we got those moratoriums because everybody would have been homeless, and also because like white people would have been homeless too. Not
and no, that can't happen.
So there were citywide, statewide, national. There was a national eviction moratorium that happened, and those dollars came down, but there's still an eviction crisis in the city of Detroit. So, what are the things that we are, whatever you're asking, like what I'm just trying to give examples of some of the things that we do and engage in, but really whenever and wherever Black people are under attack, we're in defense of their life. And we're not interested in absolving the state of their role in trying to destroy and harm us. And so really building large campaigns to fight for resources being put into our community.
I think that's fantastic, and it shows it's not just about one thing. It's about, like you said, community, which is something that's very important these days, given everything that's happened with the pandemic and people trying to still hold on to their friends, their families, their loved ones, their neighbors, their communities. I think it's fantastic work that you're doing down there in Detroit, and thank you for giving
I
all
also, I'm
this.
sorry. I also want to add that we're still facing charges, and so
Yeah, like the
we're
lawsuit's still
still
ongoing. Yeah.
engaged. Well, no, the lawsuit is one thing. We are still like literally in court on criminal charges from the protest.
Oh,
Um,
okay, okay.
so we're also still like trying to engage in a campaign to get those charges dropped because the charges are being pursued. Is one is racist, but two is political persecution of leadership, and it's an attempt to send a message to anybody. Like, if you were thinking about engaging in a fight or thinking about like engaging in struggle in defense of Black and brown life, think again.
Prepare to suffer, in other words.
Right, right. But in the wake of the Rittenhouse verdict, where this fucking white supremacist kid literally gets away with murdering people, the fact that we're still facing charges and the fact that there are people across the country who are still in jail from protest is just a clear, like, there's no clearer example of the relentless and violent nature of the state when like seeking to oppress Black and brown people, but also when seeking to really like squash and weaken any movement.
Well, any movement that challenges the state and white supremacy,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes.
But I don't want to end on a downer. We've talked about a lot of the good work they all have done, and you said you love Detroit. So, what is the thing you love most about Detroit? Like, is it like a park, a local kind of person that everybody knows in the community, like your favorite cafe or restaurant? Like, what do you love most about Motor City?
No, I can't even know.
Too much.
Yeah, that's an intense and insane question. I think again, it's that legacy of the Black radical tradition. Like, I grew up in a city. I grew up poor, in poverty line where I grew up, below the poverty line.
Dang.
So, and in many ways, like, Detroit is kind of has been like a tale of two cities, right? Because there was a huge like working class and poor population, but it also was a stronghold for the Black middle class too. So there's like those two like interests. And but it's always been a place that's been so important to the national movement. It's always been a place that's been really dynamic as far back as like the Blackburn case, where there's these fugitive slaves living in Detroit from Kentucky, and their slave owner sees them and tries to take them back. And the Black residents of Detroit, this is 1818, the Black residents of Detroit break them out of the fucking jail and get them to Canada. Like, that's the legacy of my city.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because actually, last year when I had more time to do this, because I was only working part-time at the time, I made like a, Black History Month in Canada featuring like figures from Canadian history that were Black. A lot of them tended to be from the states that fled into Canada, then either stayed or had some kind of impact. The Blackburn case is incredibly important because that ultimately leads to the like creation, if you will, of two things. It leads to these slow, it helps contribute to the slow like abolition of slavery up here in Canada. But its most like telling thing of what it actually did concretely is that it solidified Canada as the terminus of the Underground Railroad and an actual safe point of refuge. Because like you said, fugitive slaves, you still had like the origin of modern policing were slave patrols who would go into the north to find fugitive slaves and then bring them back down to the south, where, it was not a good time after that. And so what this did, and like they fought, right? Like it kind of became a bit of a diplomatic standoff.
Yes.
But the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario said, no, you know what? Like a person can't steal themselves. Like that's a stupid argument. And so it solidified what was then known as Upper Canada as, oh, you know what? This is actually a safe place. And that's why all of a sudden there's like a ton of black people showing up throughout like Niagara and Caledon and just across the city in like Amherstburg and Windsor and Essex
Like
and stuff like that.
Stanwich, Canada, which is like an insane name, but whatever.
No, but again, it's like that's. I'm glad you mentioned the Blackburn case because again, like finding like learning about that story and doing the feature on it for one day because like every day I did a different story. It reads almost like a freaking action movie. Like the city rises up and then they bust him out and they like quickly scurry him away, being chased by cops, and he gets away through the river.
And
like
the
it's
women pretend they like put on their church
outfits, and they basically did a clothing swap and they snuck her out.
They go in, they change clothes with her, so when the police come back to the cell, it's not her, it's somebody else. It's insane, but this is like actual history.
Yeah, I know. People say history is boring. I'm like, bro, we had like an action movie in the 1800s in Detroit. Like, come on.
So that's why I love my city. People can love, whatever. People can love their city, and I'm sure other places are great. But like, I come from a legacy of people who were prepared to fight and fight with everything in them. That's the legacy and the history of my city, and so I love that fighting spirit. I come from a city where, when I was growing up, when they cut your water off, because the way they do it is like an outside thing, and there's kind of like a long stick thing, and they shut it off, and it shuts off the water to your house. If you knew somebody on the block who had the key, they came and shut that shit back on for you, and that's resistance. So just that spirit and that spirit of resistance and struggle, that's what I love about my city.
All right, I'm here for it. Thank you. That's a great answer.
It was good talking to you. I don't know if there's anything else you need, but
I mean, like there's I guess really like the only other the only other question I have, I think, is what is it in your life that radicalized you? Like, was there a moment you can look back on that kind of made you be like, oh, shit's fucked and I want to change it, I got to fight back against this? Like, what is going on? Like, I can't stand for this. Was there a singular moment like that?
So yes and no, right? Like, I want... It's one of those things where, again, like, I grew up in poverty. So my entire, like, life has been coming to a realization that in some way or another I am under attack and trying to figure out where those attacks came from. And that's so I think a good example of that is like, I remember being evicted really young. I mean, we were evicted multiple times, but like the first time that I remember us being evicted, I remember it being one of the most dehumanizing experiences. They come in, the police kick the door down, they're banging and banging and banging, they kick the door down, and they grab all of our belongings and put them on the street, and we are sleeping in a van. And I don't understand it because I'm a kid and I'm like, this is our house. Why can't we go in? And we sleep in the van in front of the house because we don't know what we're going to do with our stuff, and we're trying to protect our stuff. And, after they evict us, they leave. So we still sleep in front of the house, and all the neighbors and kids that we were playing with like saw that. And, the next morning, like, having to strip naked in the backyard to use the water hose to wash up. So, I could say that there were things that radicalized me. Like, I know for a fact, like, when there was a concerted effort to the imposition of an emergency manager specifically for the school systems was a fight that I like engaged in as a young person and organized around in my schools at 12 years old. But that wouldn't be like the truth, right? Like, because the truth is that I always knew things were very unequal, and that it felt like we were being punished, but I could never as a kid really figure out what we had done to be punished. Like, evictions don't actually make sense. Watching the police like harm your family members doesn't make sense. Like, so there wasn't like an event that kind of woke me up. And I would argue like that's the same for all poor Black and brown people. Like, we don't fucking, you know, there's this thing where people are like political education, and that's great. But also I want to tell some of these white people to humble themselves, because I'm like, in the hood, we know some of this shit already. Like, you just finding out about it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, hi,
Like,
we been new. Like,
you don't need to explain to us why we need to oppose Operation Legend and Relentless Pursuit, because Black people know that the result of the fucking Joe Biden crime bill was midnight raids in our neighborhood. Like, we live this. So I don't know if that answered your question.
I think it does. It gives an example of you recognizing some kind of injustice when you were young. You couldn't fully articulate. Like, that happened to me as well. Like, not eviction, but just a kind of moment of, why is this happening? I feel like this shouldn't be happening in this supposedly fair society, right? And that kind of makes you question a lot of things. And even though you can't articulate what's wrong about it, you realize eventually as you get older, oh, that was definitely a defining moment.
Yeah, I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, you hear people say like, that's the day I realized I shouldn't trust the police. I didn't start off with that. I started off like, people pretend that like we all grow up and we're all like, the police are so great, they're here to help us, and then something happens and we interrogate it. That is not true for a whole bunch of people in this country. Like, we grow up knowing that the only time we've seen them, it has been when they have inflicted violence upon us. So there was no moment in which we realized we shouldn't trust them. Like, we grew up, we never did, right? They were never there for our protection. And so that's just the truth with systemic racism, right? Like, like
Yeah,
that.
hey, no, preaching to the choir, because like, again, like, I got the talk as a kid, right, from my dad of, hey son, so here's how cops are to me, and they'll probably be like this to you as well. I get it far less because like I don't have like the immigrant accent the way my dad does, because like Spanish is his first language and English is only his second language. Also, again, he's Black, so he gets it a lot, so he's doubly screwed by being an immigrant and Black. And so being with him, I get examples of that where we're just minding our own business, car gets pulled over for like whatever, right? Broken taillight, or he forgot to signal, and cop comes up, talks to him and me. And so, yeah, when I was young, I got the talk of, hey, here's how to actually interact with cops, and what to do to try and guarantee the best odds of your survival. It's never a full guarantee. It's not like, oh, this will always work. It's just, this gives you the best chance of success. But my dad's been arrested. He's been thrown in jail. Like, yeah, I nearly had that happen too. I've been questioned a few times, either when I was doing nothing or one time when I did have weed on me and I was allowed to walk away. But like, I got the talk from my Black father, and talking to my other cousins shortly after that, like the next time we had a family gathering of, oh, hey, did you have the talk yet? And some of the younger ones like, what's the talk? And then others were like, oh yeah, we've had the talk already. It's like, oh, so this is just like a thing that apparently all have to do. It's like, yeah, I mean, our dads are Black and brown, so, or our mothers are also Black and brown. So yeah. And like, I see you nodding like, yeah, that's just universal truth if you're non-white, unfortunately. So yeah, like I definitely understand what you mean, because I haven't been exactly where you were, but I've had some similar instances in terms of police are not our friends, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So the police are just a clear example of like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, we start from a different place. Like we don't start in a place of like the government loves us and the Democrats will save us. We don't start in that place. Right?
Yeah, no, I hear that. But then I think, because I don't want to try and end on like a downer note, I think that just shows that it's all the more important that we do things like this and support each other. You mentioned earlier in the interview about needing truly global solidarity, and I think that's a very important thing. And so what kind of like message of hope and optimism and encouragement would you have for my audience here?
We can win. And I mean, like shit. It's the road to freedom is a long road. And you gotta work. You gotta work for freedom. But we can win. We can win global liberation. I hate the word solidarity because it implies that there is somehow some like separate struggle, and we need to be like, yeah, like they
Okay.
fucked up. We really all have the same enemies. And like, we could talk all day about the role of U.S. imperialism, and like, no, we really all have the same enemies. But
That'll be our next interview, talking about U.S. imperialism.
But like, we can win. So that, I think if there was an optimistic, we can win. What we have to do is get organized and build a movement that is mass and independent, and that puts the needs of the global working class first, and that really seeks to sustain itself. But we can win. Like I just can see it. I know that sounds insane.
I don't think so.
But we actually have the power to win, and it'll be hard and it'll be painful and difficult, but we can. So
I think that is a great place to end it. That note of optimism, because I know some people need that sometimes. So again, Nakia Wallace, thank you so much for being here. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for being bothered.
All day, every day. Hi, Bother Brigade. Thank you once again for tuning into yet another episode of Progressive Profiles. It was an absolute pleasure. I personally learned a lot. I hope everyone else also learned a lot from Nikia Wallace about not just Detroit in general, but Detroit Will Breathe, how it came out of the Black Lives Matter movement, and how it's become a really positive force for political power in the city of Detroit for its residents, and they're just keeping up the good fight, which is why you can absolutely find a link to their socials down below in the description. And if you also want to continue to support this emerging show, or whatever you want to call it, then yeah, we also have a Patreon if that's something that you might be interested in. And speaking of Patreon, I do want to thank my patrons who have basically allowed for this and other things to happen. I really just want to thank everyone's support for this channel, this show. It feels like I'm doing something right, and thank you all for being a part of this. I really well and truly appreciate it. And again, huge thanks to Nikia Wallace and the people of Detroit Will Breathe for taking time to sit down with me and give a lot more information. And I hope people will continue to support their movement and take that hope and that optimism and move forward with it, right? As she says at the very end there, we can win. It just takes a lot of work, right? But man, some of what she was saying about what the cops are doing in Detroit, absolutely unreal. And it was definitely what's bothering me today.